Hi, everyone. This is Alan Lewis from Natural Grocers, and I'm here with Stefan Erickson. Hi, Stefan. How are you?
Hey, good, Alan. Really good. How about yourself?
Great. Stefan is the author of The Great Healing, Five Compassions That Can Save Our World. And if you see this book with this beautiful bright orange and yellow cover with the globe up here in the sunflower, I highly recommend you take a look at it. It's just a superb introduction to a set of very complex issues. And Stefan has done a great job of weaving them together in layman's terms to make it understandable and, more importantly, so you can take action. Well, we decided to talk today and record this conversation to give some people the background for how you decided to compile all of this information in the book, how you named it, and your personal passion that you brought to it. And it kind of started through an introduction we had from one of your childhood friends, John Fisher.
Mm.
Then I met you out in California while I was on a business trip to Expo West. We had a very long lunch that kind of went into dinner and talked about a number of different issues in great depth. And then to take a hop, skip, and a jump, I suggested you come out to the American Grass-Fed Association conference at the Stone Barn Center in New York. And that was kind of a catalyst, as I remember, where you met so many extraordinary people. And not only were you blown over with what they were contributing to the world and their understanding of the food and agriculture system, but they gave you that same compliment back. They became very excited about your project. Now, do you remember that excitement that you had during that conference?
Well, that conference was wild. I remember, first of all, I love New York and staying in Manhattan and taking the train up. I forget, I just love Stone Barns, the folks there. That was where, again, Mary Berry, if you remember, was
Yeah.
kind of like the main person there. And then that became very important for the book and a great connection.
And Will Harris, who's in your book? Yeah.
Yep. He turned out it was wonderful, and actually it appears in two different chapters in the book. And there are other people there. An author, Friends of the Earth,
Jerry Hammerschlag. Yeah.
who became very helpful and connected me to some key people. But I love that adventure. Like Stone Barns was such a tremendous place. I'd never been there before. Do you remember the first day was sunny, and we had the tour of the
beautiful
animal?
Yeah, yeah.
And then the next day I'm taking the train up, and it's like it snowed 5 feet overnight. We're just like trudging through the snow to get there, and it's snowing while we're in there. It's a bit of an adventure. It's great.
And the great thing was that so many people there were farmers and ranchers.
Yes.
That the snowstorm didn't matter one bit, and just incredibly moving conversations for a couple of days. So the blizzard to me added a lot.
For me too, it made an adventure out of all of it. And I love it. It was intimate. It was maybe 40 or 50 people-ish, it was small and intimate. So over 2 days there, you could just talk and meet a number of people and get to know them really well. So, and one thing you mentioned too is it's a separate question about the origin of the book and the idea. But what I had at this point really was a title, the 5 chapters on compassion, and I knew exactly where the book was going. And also I had the arch fill-in and our singular solution. I had all that in mind, and I took that with me to Stone Barns. So when I was going to Stone Barns, basically I had about a 13-page outline, sketches for all the chapters and everything else.
Right.
But I was really thrilled with that. But then again, that's me. The validation I got there, people really opened up to the idea and responded. And it's great you mentioned that too, because I felt that. And I left Stone Barns not having just a wonderful adventure and a great experience meeting everybody, but the idea that I knew I was onto something. I knew that this is where, and I started writing shortly thereafter when I got back to Los Angeles.
It was really fun while you were writing that, because all of us who wanted to say something in the book or wanted to write a book about something, we knew that we could say, hey, Stefan, here's something you should include. And here's a perspective you may have missed. And here's somebody that can really add some meat, pardon the pun, to this book. And you really successfully found the right people and the right voices that way. And
Yes.
all of us were just delighted with the outcome. So great job. Now, it did end up being 400 pages because, and it could have been 4,000 and still have been fascinating from first page to last. Who was the very best contributor, either an essay or someone you interviewed, that kind of gelled the whole thing for you, that you were just ecstatic to have?
Uh, there were two actually, and one of course is
Besides me, Stefan.
well, you're actually giving me the second one, and I mean that sincerely. The first was Windleberry, because
Yeah,
when I wrote to Windleberry, you know, Mary said, I have no, I can't say what he'll respond to or not. You have to write
right.
it. And so it's what P.O. Box 1 down there, like in his town in Kentucky where he is. And, you know, I asked him, you know, the poem, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. There's a poem of his that I wanted to use, and it's one of his most famous poems. And so, in fact, Mary Berry actually recited that poem at Stone Barns on the second day. I think it was in our final lunch.
That's right.
And I just thought that would just fit perfectly in the book. And you know, he was so gracious, and you know, I sent him everything I had on the book at that time, and he let me use the poem, and he gave me the permission to use the poem in the book, and that meant a lot. And that you know, again, validating the book and having him behind it and supporting it. And then the second one, it's also a fun origin story, was your essay. And I think that meant a great deal.
No, I didn't intend to throw you that softball. I was actually joking, but I want to hear this.
No, this is true. Is that you have just this fascinating, unique voice and tone. The way you speak is the way you write. And I just thought from the get-go, and this is, we go back even further than that with the farm animal compassion engagement interviews we did and stuff like that for another side I have. But I just knew that this would be within your wheelhouse, and you're so insightful. And if you remember, you contributed a first draft of that essay almost right away, like that spring, I think, or early summer, you delivered. And you know, then we reworked it for about a year and a half. In fact, really, it was very good to begin with, but then it just got really tight and sharp.
Because I remember we tried to make it more succinct and ended up making it broader.
It's true. It's like, yeah, there's this, what's the expression for that? It's like something like expansion by contraction or something.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
You know, part of that was, there's a couple things that you were talking about that were already in the book. So we shifted a little bit, and but then it suddenly came alive for you even further, and it was just wonderful. But the key thing at that early stage, why it meant so much to me, was, you know, I had Windleberry's poem, and that's a name I could use as well to get people who I call my thought leaders. When I found out who they were, because I didn't know initially who they were going to be, I just felt one for each chapter or something. I had an idea. But the fact that you'd already delivered something, and so I couldn't show that to people because it wasn't finished. But the fact that you and Wendell were on board, that meant a lot. And I think that was very important, because Dr. Joel Furman, who's very busy and a 7-time now New York Times bestseller, he had to see stuff like that. He had to see what I had to be willing to commit.
Right, to get that critical mass. And I'm very rarely, if never, mentioned in the same sentence as Wendell Berry. But thank you for that. So the book came together. One of the fascinating things is that you were more or less a practicing vegetarian, and you come at this from the angle that, among other angles, but the angle that animals need and deserve and have right to compassionate treatment, full natural behaviors during their lives. And if and when they're killed, that needs to be humanely, but it needs to be a very thoughtful relationship between humanity, agricultural producers, and those animals. And yet many of your contributors are very much pro-meat, pro-livestock ranchers, and believe that the livestock is required to have a functioning agricultural system without using synthetic chemicals. So there must have been some tension between people seeing, what is this vegetarian writing this book for, and how does livestock fit into it? Now, I think you resolved that really successfully, but can you walk us through how you did that?
Well, it's always a balance. And by the way, also, when you consider a number of my contributors are vegans, there's a lot of a balance I had to do with this book. And the idea is about eating meat is just eat proportionally, eat healthy, good, safe, pastured, you know, meat, and then in moderation, like with meat and dairy, so you have an overall healthy diet. So I'm reaching out to everybody. I I took that broad approach from the get-go.
It's interesting. You also took a deep dive into nutrition and the nutrition of pastured livestock compared to industrial meat, and questions of residues and pesticides and hormones and all of this. When there was a topic, you dug into it, but a lot of that stuff was brand new to you, as I remember. I remember those late night phone calls saying, how do I learn about this? Because it's got to be in here, right?
Right. Oh, it was in the 2.5 years that this adventure took and all the travel. Every time I'm going and interviewing people, meeting people, or going and visiting certain areas with people that would actually be in the book, it's always a learning experience. And it's 5 chapters, the book, and as I go each one. Once Lou Preston at a winery in California said, it looks like you're writing 5 books. And actually, right, each chapter is in-depth enough, it can almost be a standalone book. So, but I wanted it, this was the way it was always originally intended. And it's just a learning experience over 2 years. And there are things that I did not know anything about when I started that I had to become not necessarily expert at, but really versed in and knowledgeable about. So,
yeah, and you had to get it right. And ultimately, you once you had your draft and your footnotes and your sources, then you turned around and took it back to some world-class experts and asked the question, honestly, did I get this right? And I'm bringing that up because you didn't bring an ideological, predetermined outcome to the book. This is not ideology. This is practical, evidence-based science and observation. And that's what makes the book so human. Everybody, regardless of their own dietary practices or whether they're a farmer or a rancher or eat meat or not, can relate from a basic human level through their experience to the book. What was there a moment where you actually submitted a draft on a topic and somebody said, whoa, Nelly, you got off the track a little bit, and they got you back on?
Not really. Not like
because you did your research well. Okay.
Well, I mean, there were a couple times where once there was and virtually everybody that I interviewed when I wrote about them for the book, naturally then I send everybody what I'm writing about.
Right.
And ask them, are they happy with the way it is? And I'd use their feedback and change things. There's only one dairy farmer, one couple, that basically, after seeing what I wrote about them, which was very complimentary about their pastured modern dairy and the great quality milk and everything they do, but side by side with the treatment of factory farmed dairy cattle and the horrific abuse they suffer, they didn't want to be side by side with that, even though it's very clear that they weren't that. They were the antidote to that. They didn't like just that juxtaposition. And then also Dr. Joel Furman. And then also Dr. Joel Furman was tough because in a good way, I learned a lot with him because in the chapter on health, all my medical facts were correct, but he looked at my endnotes and was basically saying, and he taught me a lesson, which is basically, you want studies from Harvard, you want studies from Yale, you want to quote the top doctors.
Right.
And some of that I did, but some of my quotes were from lesser people, like a chiropractor or somebody else.
Yeah.
And they might be saying something that they've documented and they're correct, so that's why they're in my book. But he said, you need to get a higher quality of overall sources.
So find the source that your source used and go up until you find the actual science and vet it, which was great advice. And I noticed that in your footnotes, not a lot of alternative health or ag sites there. They are really a lot of scientific studies and globally recognized experts. I think that adds so much to the book. And you also included them all, whereas you could have just written a narrative and dropped the sources. What was the reason for that gravitas of all of the scientific citations?
Yeah, and I'm really happy about that. And this was from the get-go. I thought, okay, if I'm coming in from an outsider's perspective, I'm an environmental and animal rights activist. I've had a career in the entertainment industry. In other words, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a journalist. One of the things I want to do is first off, create, take a stand on these issues, and then make sure that it's ironclad, that it's backed up with all the science. So what I do in the book is there's 930 endnotes, and virtually every single one of them is linked to the actual source.
Right.
Even when I quote from a book, a lot of people will take a quote from a book and they say the book and don't tell you where the quote is.
Right.
So if you wanted to check the context of that quote, it's just, you know, when I quote a book, I tell the exact page I got the quote from. So now get this, the book is encyclopedic because in the digital versions,
Right.
all those links in the endnotes are active. So
Right.
in one click on any issue, if you're a student and want a deeper dive, if you're somebody that comes from see where I got that information, one link, one click on your computer, you're right in that study, or you're right in that research paper, you're right in that article. So it's like encyclopedic that way, and I wanted it to be
Yeah.
so that it's above criticism, but also it's a useful tool.
And as
And
I watch the reviews coming in, which are all very positive and laudatory, I also look for criticism of the book, and it's striking how few people in the industrial agriculture and food industry who you are definitely calling out for unacceptable practices, they don't want to touch this book. They don't want to criticize you because they know it's so well researched. They just as soon be very quiet and act like the book doesn't exist. Are you saying the same thing on your end?
I am, you know, and I would love actually to maybe get on panels in the future when everybody can and just have those kind of debates face to face with people. I just, that's why I wanted to kind of establish my expertise or my perspective on that. And if there's value there, I'd love to engage. But right now, that's not happening. And I think another reason why it might not be happening is every time I've stated something about big ag or an industry or something, it's factually backed up, and I show exactly where I get all my information from these international studies. So if they wanted to attack, one of the first things I might do is just have somebody fact check everything and see where I might have made a mistake and be vulnerable.
Yeah, it's all there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to wrap up on one last question for part one of our conversation about the book. And I've heard many people say very emotionally compelling things about your naming the animals and humanizing the animals or personifying the animals so that it's not just an object that we raise, kill, and eat, or just buy under plastic on styrofoam at the grocery store. So that is typically for young adult fiction like Charlotte's Web, but you brought that technique in really effectively. Where did that come from, and did it take a little bit of bravery to do the personification of Thomas Q. Piglet at the same time that you are citing the World Health Organization, the National Institutes of Health? They seem a little incongruous, but you brought it together.
Well, that was the design from the get-go, and the idea for that comes again my years of animal activism. That's been being done now for 5 or 10 years with groups like PETA and others, where if you name an animal, you know, it establishes that bond. You know, the cute photo of the animal, you name it, and then suddenly you learn that it's in a factory farm, what's going on with that animal. People care a lot more about it because there's that. So I wanted that in the book. But it also fits into, again, I've been a screenwriter, you know, in Hollywood for 30 years, you know, and a filmmaker. I'm a feature filmmaker. And when I ran entertainment companies, I would be putting out, I would license all these types of programming, animal and other, and I would be the one developing the marketing copy and stuff like that. And so this is a secret. It goes back and telling a story. You want people to relate to these animals and then feel for their plight. And I thought that's one of the unique approaches I could do that would make this book stand out that others don't, is that this is not a clinical expose. It's not a deep, heavy science paper. It's stories, compelling stories with a beginning, a middle, and end about Pat the protozoa, Pat the Pooper, or Earl the Worm, or Lucinda Monarch, or Thomas Q. Piglet, and they rock people. I just had an interview last week with Nancy Nancy Perlman at New Directions, and the second half of the interview, that was what she just kept coming back to, was how it moved her, all these stories one after another of these what I call my exquisite creatures.
But simultaneously, some of your most exquisite creatures in the book are the children and the families whose stories you tell, and these are intertwined, and it's the same story because in fact we're all part of the same world and the same environment. but talking about the kids riding the bus uh, through the mist of pig manure, um, and all the other stories, they're so well done. And yet you are intertwining all of the science and the nutrition. And I think that's what people like about it. It takes a while to read the book, but you come out of it feeling very human, feeling very involved, not detached, not apart from agriculture and the environment, but you're actually feeling more like you actually have a role and you're a part of it. And everything you eat and what you choose to eat, you have this impact on. So ultimately, it's very empowering in the end. Is that also what you're hearing from your readers?
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of feedback along that regard. It's working for people. Um, uh, some people find the first chapter, Compassion for Animals, a little difficult because we get into some animals in difficult situations, and I make you care about them. So it's a little, for some, it's a little harder reading. Where people like they're with the ASPCA love that chapter so much they table my book at every single event they do now. You know, it's like it's just their language. But I think that was definitely the goal, just on every chapter to engage people with, you know, human or non-human, my exquisite creatures, their situations, and then look through, they have a problem, and to see what this very serious problem they're dealing with through the lens of people that are actually, or animals that are experiencing that reality.
So to wrap up on a kind of a lighthearted note, have you chosen the narrator for the audiobook, Stefan?
No.
Okay. When we come back, think about what that voice sounds like or what those voices sound like, because that will make or break the audio version, right?
I
What?
said, Helen, you have a very uniquely compelling voice, come to think of it.
No, 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 no. I believe Rocky and Bullwinkle comes to mind, but thanks for the vote. It was really great talking to you. We'll get this conversation recording wrapped up and cleaned up and get it posted online. And I'm really looking forward to digging a little deeper in part two. So thank you very much, Stefan.
Pleasure. Anytime, Alan. Thank you very much.
Bye bye.
Bye.